The Unknown Blessing. The family her aside could not foresee her rise. Written by Nantatsuko Enzumalo. Chapter 1. Scene 1. She had been in labor for a whole week, but her cervix was still only 3 centimeters dilated. The baby's heartbeat was slower than normal, and she was getting exhausted. "We need to operate," the doctor said after examining her. Forms were brought to her, and she signed them, ready for the operation. She didn't know how she would take care of the baby. She had no one, nothing, and didn't even know the baby's father since she had been raped. After 30 minutes, the operation was complete. A baby girl was born. She named her Busasu, believing she was a blessing in disguise. 3 days later, they were discharged from the hospital. The pain from the surgery made it difficult for her to walk fast. As she made her way home, she was hit by a car and died on the spot. But before she passed, she managed to throw the baby into the grass, saving her life. Busasu was found by the police and taken to the hospital, where she remained for 6 months due to her injuries. After being discharged, social workers took her to an orphanage. Scene 2. Mr. Makibo Swain's family was wealthy and well-known, with many businesses in Richards Bay. While Mr. Swain worked in the family businesses, he was also the founder of Swain Attorneys, his own law firm. He was the firstborn and the only son among his 5 siblings. At the age of 30, he married his high school sweetheart, Zama. However, Makibo's parents were against the marriage because Zama's background and standard of living were far below theirs. They believed she was only interested in his money and the luxurious lifestyle, and that once she gained access to wealth, she wouldn't fulfill her duties as a wife. After 5 years of marriage, they had no children. They tried both Western and traditional remedies to conceive, but nothing worked. Makibo's family pressured him to take a second wife, but he refused. They even threatened to cut him off from their inheritance if he didn't comply, but he remained firm in his decision. In an attempt to manipulate him, his family hired a young woman as a worker in their home, hoping she would seduce him. Still, Makibo was not tempted. Instead, he chose to move out and buy a home so that his wife could live in peace. He told his parents they could exclude him from their inheritance if they wished, but they didn't go through with it, though they were furious. They insisted that, as the only son, he could not leave their family home. However, Makibo was exhausted from watching his wife being mistreated, so he stood his ground, and his family eventually had to let him go. Chapter 2. Scene 1. God, please give me a baby. This is the only thing I ask for. Please bless me. This is the only thing that can bring joy to our marriage. My husband and I have worked so hard for many years to have a happy family. We are wealthy, but our hearts are empty. We need this baby to create a warm, happy family and to have someone to leave our wealth to. I want this baby to erase all the pain and insults from my in-laws. They call me good for nothing and barren. What is the use of having all this wealth if there is no happiness? Who will maintain it when we are gone? Oh Lord, I beg you in the name of Jesus. Crying. This was Zama's daily prayer. She desperately wanted a baby. Makibo was very supportive and loving. Even though the situation was difficult, he remained hopeful that one day they would have a child. A year ago, he suggested adoption, but Zama refused, saying she wanted to experience pregnancy. She decided to try IVF for the 3rd time, but once again, it failed. Recently, she started reconsidering adoption. Now that they were living alone, away from Makibo's toxic family, she felt it was the right time. She decided to talk to her husband and begin the adoption process. She was finally ready for it. When Makibo came home from work, he was surprised to see his wife happy. He thought the therapy sessions she had been attending were finally helping. It had been a long time since he had seen her like this, and he was relieved. That evening, Mrs. Swain prepared dinner. Makibo went upstairs to freshen up before joining her. They had a lovely dinner, filled with laughter and romantic conversation. Later, as they got ready for bed, Zama told her husband she was ready for adoption. Makibo was overjoyed. Since it was Friday, they decided to submit their application on Monday. They planned to start by adopting a baby girl under 1 year old. When she turned 5 and started school, they would adopt a baby boy. That weekend, they were busy transforming a spare room opposite their master bedroom into a nursery. They knew the process could take a long time, but they were confident they would qualify and eventually bring their baby home. Scene 2. Monday had arrived, and the Swain family was ready to start the adoption process. They went to the nearest orphanage, where they explained their situation. The adoption process was then carefully explained to them. They were given a chance to see the children. Love, they are all so cute. I wish I could take them all, Mrs. Swain said, her heart full of emotion. Most of the children were older than 1 year, except for two who were under a year old. One was a 7-month-old boy, and the other was a 9-month-old girl named Busey. On Wednesday, social workers visited the Swain family for a home study. They assessed the family's living situation, home environment, and family background. They also conducted interviews with Mr. and Mrs. Swain and evaluated their ability to provide a stable and nurturing home for a child. The social workers were very impressed with what they saw. Since they didn't have an active appointment, they had to wait for 5 patients to be seen before it was their turn. Finally, they were called into the consultation room. Mrs. Swain explained everything she was experiencing, and the doctor carefully took notes before asking a few follow-up questions. Then the doctor asked, "When was the last time you had your period?" Mrs. Swain hesitated. She genuinely couldn't remember. She quickly took out her phone and opened her period tracker app, which she always updated. According to the app, she was 35 days late. Her last period was in November, and now it was January. The doctor handed her a cup and asked her to provide a urine sample. When she returned, the doctor took out a pregnancy test, dipped it into the sample, and waited. Boom, 2 clear lines appeared. The doctor smiled and congratulated them. Mr. and Mrs. Swain sat there in shock, unable to react. Mr. Swain, still processing the news, requested another test, convinced there must be a mistake. The doctor agreed, but once again, the second test came back positive. To remove all doubt, the doctor suggested an ultrasound. Mrs. Swain remained silent the entire time. Then, tears streamed down her face as she remembered all the pain and struggles of not being able to conceive. The emotions overwhelmed her. When they got home, she went straight to bed and cried. Mr. Swain stayed by her side, doing his best to comfort her until she finally fell asleep. When it was time to fetch Busey from school, Mrs. Swain was still asleep. Mr. Swain decided to pick her up alone. On their way home, Busey asked about her mother's health, then excitedly told her father everything that had happened at school. Their conversation continued all the way home. Chapter 4, Scene 1. Mrs. Swain's pregnancy journey was exhausting and emotionally draining. She was constantly sick, and her weak cervix put her at high risk of losing the baby. At 12 weeks, she underwent a cerclage procedure to stitch her cervix and prevent premature birth. For the first time since adopting Busey, Mrs. Swain lost control. She shouted at her and even hit her. Overcome with guilt, she tried to comfort her afterward, regretting her actions deeply. She didn't tell her husband about the incident and bribed Busey into silence, promising her pizza and ice cream, her favorite treats. But it wasn't just a one-time incident. The stress and hormonal changes made Mrs. Swain lash out at Busey multiple times. Eventually, Mrs. Swain confided in the doctor, who reassured her that mood swings and irritability were common during pregnancy and would likely subside after childbirth. While she agreed outwardly, deep down, she felt an unsettling realization. She no longer wanted Busey in her life. Yet, she knew she couldn't tell her husband that. Mr. Swain, on the other hand, adored Busey. To him, she was a blessing, a divine test of their patience and love before their biological child arrived. He loved her deeply and called her Daddy's little princess. Their bond was unbreakable. So when Mrs. Swain subtly suggested that if they had 2 biological children, they should consider putting Busey up for adoption, he firmly refused. Scene 3. After months of struggle, the long-awaited delivery day arrived in October. The Swain family welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. It was the happiest day of their lives. 4 days later, doctors confirmed that both mother and baby were healthy, and they were discharged from the hospital. Busey was overjoyed to meet her baby sister. She proudly declared that she would take her to school and show her classmates. She loved the idea of being a big sister and embraced her new role wholeheartedly. The Swain family was filled with happiness and gratitude, naming their daughter Beckel, meaning God is trustworthy, as they believed he had entrusted them with this beautiful soul after years of struggle. Since they had now been blessed with a child naturally, they no longer needed to go through with their previous plan of adopting a baby boy. As time passed, baby Beckel grew quickly, and Mrs. Swain's love for her biological daughter deepened. Unfortunately, her bond with Busey began to fade. Chapter 5. 5 years later, Busey was now 10 years old, and Beckel was 5. It was time for them Beckel to start kindergarten. Mr. Zwane wanted both his daughters to. For the past 5 years, their marriage had been in turmoil, with constant arguments. Mrs. Zwane had stopped pretending to love Busisiu. It was now evident that she no longer cared for her. Several times, she tried to convince her husband to put Busisiu up for adoption, but Mr. Zwane firmly refused. Seeing how badly his wife was treating Busisiu, he hired a maid to care for her. He even suggested that his wife seek professional help in the hopes that she might rekindle her love for Busisiu, but the attempt failed. Although Busisiu didn't fully understand what was happening, she learned to keep her distance from her mother. Instead, she found comfort in the maid, treating her as a mother figure. This deeply troubled Mr. Zwane. He eventually stopped discussing anything related to Busisiu with his wife, as she showed no interest in her at all. Mr. Zwane was determined to send both children to the same school, but he ultimately agreed with his wife's decision to enroll them Beckel elsewhere. He realized that having both girls in the same school would be problematic during school functions or parent meetings. Mrs. Zwane would attend for them Beckel but completely ignore Busisiu if he was unavailable. The maid and Mrs. Zwane would end up attending the same school, but for different children, which would raise concerns among teachers and be emotionally distressing for Busisiu. Chapter 6, Scene 1. When them Beckel was 7, the Zwane family discovered they were expecting another child. Mrs. Zwane was overjoyed, but her husband was devastated. In his mind, he had already planned to divorce his wife so he could take care of Busisiu and provide her with a warm, loving home. Now with a pregnancy, he felt trapped. He couldn't leave his wife in such a vulnerable state. Her pregnancies always made her sick, and she needed his support. Despite his unhappiness, he couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to his unborn child. This pregnancy forced Mr. Zwane to accept a bitter truth. His wife would never love Busisiu again. Mrs. Zwane, sensing his support during her pregnancy, tried to take advantage of the situation. She insisted that they should give Busisiu up for adoption, arguing that with another child on the way, they no longer needed her. Raising Busisiu would only be an unnecessary financial burden. But no matter how hard she tried to convince him, Mr. Zwane refused to abandon the child he had grown to love as his own. Scene 2. Mr. Zwane stood by his wife until she gave birth. Although they had hoped for a boy, they were still happy to welcome another baby girl into their family. Busisiu and them Beckel were thrilled to meet their little sister. They would now be 3 princesses. Despite their mother's unfair treatment, both older girls loved each other deeply. The newborn was named Asifo, meaning a gift from God. But even after her birth, there was no peace in the Zwane household. The marriage continued to deteriorate, and the couple began sleeping in separate rooms. Mr. Zwane decided he would wait until Nasifo turned 2 before proceeding with a divorce. Though he still loved his wife, his love for Busisiu was even stronger. He firmly believed that no one could provide her with a better life than him. He couldn't understand how his wife had gone from loving Busisiu to despising her. It was unfathomable. Who could hate an innocent child? He owed Busisiu everything. She had once brought joy and light into their home. If it weren't for her, his wife might have succumbed to depression years ago. Yet now, that same woman wanted to cast her aside. It was a heartbreaking reality, but one he could no longer ignore. Chapter 7, Scene 1. Busisiu was 17, and in her matric year, she was a dark, thick, and beautiful young woman. Her younger siblings, them Beckel, who was 12, and Nasifo, who was only 5, were the lastborns of the family. Despite everything, all 3 of them loved their father deeply. However, Busisiu never understood why her mother hated her so much. She had made peace with it over time, but the pain lingered. On some occasions, Mrs. Zwane would even tell her outright that she wasn't her child. Whenever Busisiu asked her father for clarity, he would only say, "One day I will tell you, but just know, your mother is your mother. She has her own traumas, but she loves you." Yet deep inside, Busisiu sometimes believed her mother was telling the truth. That evening, the 3 children sat down, waiting for their father to arrive home for dinner. He was running late from the office. Mrs. Zwane's phone rang. It was her husband. He called to inform her that he was caught in traffic and would be a bit late. He told them to go ahead and eat so that the younger girls could sleep and Busisiu could study. After the call, Mrs. Zwane relayed the message, then left them to eat while she went to her room. Busisiu was relieved. She thought to herself that dinner was going to be long and difficult without her father's presence. Without him, she planned to eat only an apple. She and her sisters ate quietly. Just as they were about to clean the table, they heard the doorbell ring. Scene 2. The kids knew it wasn't their father. He never rang the doorbell since he had his own spare keys. But they also knew it was safe, since visitors had to get clearance from security before entering the house. Mrs. Swain called out to Busescu, instructing her to check who was at the door. When she opened it, she found 3 police officers standing there. They greeted her and asked to speak with her mother. Busescu went upstairs to inform her mother, but before she could even explain, Mrs. Swain shouted at her. Busescu was used to this kind of treatment, so she simply said, "There are police officers at the door. They need to speak with you." Her mother was visibly shocked. She quickly put on her gown and rushed downstairs to the living room, where the officers were waiting. They greeted her before asking to speak with her privately. She instructed the girls to go to their rooms. Then, the police delivered the devastating news. Mr. Swain had been involved in a terrible car accident on his way home. Mrs. Swain was frozen in shock. Words failed her. But there was no time. She needed to go with them to identify and confirm the body, as well as arrange for the insurance to transport him to the morgue. She didn't say a word to the children. She simply went upstairs, changed into something comfortable, and told them she was stepping out. She instructed Busescu to take care of her sisters. Busescu could sense that something was terribly wrong, but she never imagined it was this serious. Their mother returned home around 10 p.m. The 2 little girls were already asleep, but Busescu was still awake. Mrs. Swain entered the house and went straight to her room without saying a word, but Busescu could hear her crying. She wanted to ask about her father, but she knew her mother would only snap at her. So instead, she picked up her phone and tried to call him. The phone rang and rang, but for the first time ever, it went to voicemail. Panic started to creep in. Could it be that her father was gone? She tried to push the thought away, but tears welled up in her eyes. If he was truly gone, her life was over. Her mother was going to kill her. Determined to find out, she went upstairs. Even if her mother shouted at her or even hit her, she had to know. She knocked on the door for several minutes. No reply. She called both of her parents' names. No response. But inside, she could hear her mother sobbing softly. "Mom, why are you crying?" she asked. Still no answer. Now she was terrified, trying to shake away her worst fear. She took a deep breath and asked, "Did Dad leave us? Is Dad sick? Is Dad dead?" Their screams woke them Beckel and Nasifo, who rushed upstairs. They saw their sister crying. "Busey, what's wrong?" Them Beckel asked, but she got no response. At first, them Beckel thought their mother had hit Busescu again. But if that were the case, why was their mother crying too? Confused and scared, the little girls knocked on their mother's door, calling out to her. That night, they all fell asleep in their mother's room. Busescu, however, retreated to her own room. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spiraling into darkness, and eventually, she cried herself to sleep. Scene 3. Early in the morning, Mrs. Swain gathered the girls in the sitting room to tell them the painful truth. She took a deep breath and said, "Your father is gone." Busescu already knew. She had been crying nonstop. Them Beckel, who hadn't understood the situation the previous day, had cried simply because their mother was crying. But now, realizing the truth, she broke down in fresh sobs. Nasifo, the youngest, didn't fully understand. Mrs. Swain explained gently, "Your father now stays with God. He has become an angel, and we will never see him again." But Nasifo was still confused. All she knew was that everyone around her was crying, and no one answered when she asked why. By 1 p.m., relatives started arriving at their home after hearing the news. Mr. Swain had passed away on Tuesday and was laid to rest on Saturday. It was a painful funeral, filled with sorrow. He had been a man with a good heart, always helping others. His loss was deeply felt. But no one was hurting more than Busescu. She was consumed by fear. What would happen to her now? She knew her mother too well. Would she throw her out? She prayed desperately that it wouldn't happen. She was in matric. She couldn't afford to leave school now. If she did, what future would she have? The thought of it all was unbearable. Scene 4. A week after the funeral, life slowly returned to normal for everyone else. The relatives left, and Busescu remained in the house with her mother and sisters. One evening, while she was studying for an upcoming exam, her mother entered her room and sat down on the edge of her bed. Mrs. Swain looked at her coldly. "Since you saw your father being buried, you should know that you no longer have any parents. Don't ask me for anything, and don't come to me for help. If you need something, work for it. Nothing is free. You owe me for raising you. That loser died trying to cross the road with you when you were 3 days old. Imagine that. Who crosses the road with a newborn and a fresh operation wound? Idiot." She laughed again, mocking the tragedy. Bucecille's heart shattered. She had always wondered why her mother didn't love her like she did her other children. Now it all made sense. She wasn't really her mother. She wasn't truly part of this family, and she had always felt different. Now she understood why. Tears streamed down her face. But before she could fully process the pain, Mrs. Swain snapped, "Shut up, stop that noise, and go prepare dinner." "But Mom, I have an exam tomorrow," Bucecille pleaded. "Did I stutter? You will cook. You're nothing but a maid now. That's how you'll repay me for all the money we wasted raising you." Bucecille was speechless. She had dreamed of finishing school, getting good grades, and applying for a bursary. Now, it felt like her future was slipping away before her eyes. That night, Bucecille was forced to move her belongings to the back room, where she was to live from now on. As she lay down on the cold floor, she realized she hadn't even had time to process the truth about her adoption. There was no space for grief, only survival. This was her new reality, her permanent life. Chapter 8, Scene 1. 12 years had passed since Mr. Swain's death. Busey was now 29, Thembekal was 24, and Nasifo was 17. Thembekal and Nasifo had both completed high school, but showed no interest in further education. They felt secure, knowing their father had left them an inheritance. In contrast, Busey had always dreamed of becoming a doctor. However, that dream was shattered 12 years ago when her adoptive mother, who had taken her in at 9 months old, forced her to drop out of school during her matric year. Instead of supporting her education, she expected Busey to work as a maid to repay her for raising her. Scene 2. It was December, and the festive season was in full swing. Christmas was just around the corner, and every family was busy preparing for the celebrations. The Swain household was no exception. Every day, Busey had to wake up at 4 a.m. to heat water for her mother and sisters, prepare breakfast, and clean the house. December was an especially busy time, and some days, she had to wake up as early as 3 a.m. to get everything done. On some nights, she wasn't even allowed to sleep in her own bed. She had to sit by the gate, waiting for her sisters to return from their nights out. If she fell asleep and didn't hear them arrive, her mother would wake her up with a beating. Her duties didn't end there. No matter the time, she had to open the gate for her sisters, prepare their favorite meals before they went to bed, and clean up after them. On Monday, while doing laundry, washing everything by hand since she wasn't allowed to use the washing machine, her mother handed her money to buy groceries. Busey placed the money under a stone outside and continued with her chores. But when she went back to retrieve it, the money was gone. Panicked, she asked her sisters if they had taken it, but they denied it. When she told her mother what had happened, the woman exploded in rage. "Find it now," she screamed. Busey searched everywhere but couldn't find the money. When she returned with empty hands, her mother slapped her twice. Then, without remorse, she gave Busey more money and sent her to buy the groceries. As punishment, she declared that Busey wouldn't be allowed to eat food from the house for the next 2 weeks. Later that evening, the youngest sister returned home with the missing money, casually revealing that she had taken it from under the stone. But when confronted by their mother, she denied everything. Instead of punishing the real thief, their mother turned on Busey once again. "How dare you accuse your sister of stealing?" she yelled, before punishing Busey a second time. No matter what she did, Busey was always the one to suffer. Scene 3. After receiving the replacement money, Busey went to buy groceries. On her way back from the market, just as she was approaching home, only 2 houses away, a sleek, expensive car appeared. The driver slowed down and tried to get her attention, but Busey ignored him and kept walking. Undeterred, the driver sped up, pulled over right in front of her house, and stepped out of the car. The man was undeniably handsome, light-skinned, well-dressed, and clearly wealthy. Even the way he carried himself exuded confidence and status. But Busey wasn't interested. The man, unfazed by her reaction, introduced himself. "My name is Sizwe. I want you to marry me." Busey's frustration turned to anger. Was this some kind of joke? She didn't have time for this nonsense, especially not when she knew her mother was likely watching from the balcony, as she often did. Just as she feared, Her mother's voice suddenly rang out. Busey. Panic surged through her. Without another word to the man, she rushed inside the gate. Her mother was waiting, furious. Why were you standing with that boy? She shouted. If you get pregnant, I'll throw you out. You'll end up on the streets like your mother, suffering until you die. The only reason I'll let you stay here is out of mercy. Don't you dare mess that up. Scene 4. Mrs. Swain was furious, wondering how such a handsome and wealthy man could possibly be interested in someone like Busey. A girl who didn't even take care of her hair and wore oversized clothes that were clearly hand-me-downs. She decided that if the man returned, she would make sure he took one of her other daughters instead. The next morning, after breakfast, Mrs. Swain went to the balcony, sipping her green tea, while watching the street below. That's when she noticed the same car that had followed Busey the previous day. It was parked across the road, under a tree, directly in front of her house. Without hesitation, she called Busey and sent her to the pharmacy to fetch her pills. As soon as Busey stepped out of the gate, the man quickly exited his car and grabbed her arm to stop her. Busey was furious, scared, and anxious. This man was going to get her in trouble with her mother again. How do you even know my name? She demanded. The man calmly replied, I heard your mother call you yesterday. Before she could respond, the gate creaked open, and her mother stepped outside. At that moment, Busey wanted the ground to swallow her whole, but to her surprise, her mother didn't seem angry this time. The man immediately let go of Busey's arm as Mrs. Swain approached. She looked at him, then at Busey, before saying, if you have something serious to say, come inside so we can talk properly. Inside the sitting room, the man introduced himself. My name is Sizwe Ng Kobo. I'm a businessman, he explained, detailing his background. Mrs. Swain was impressed. This is the perfect man for one of my daughters, she thought. Without hesitation, she lied. Busey is already engaged, she said smoothly. The bride price has already been paid, and soon she'll be moving into her husband's house. Mrs. Swain ignored his words and instead called her daughters. Girls, come down. Then Beckel and Nisifo appeared at the top of the stairs, looking annoyed, until they saw Sizwe. Their expressions instantly changed, and they strutted down the stairs, smiling and swaying their hips. Meet my beautiful daughters, Mrs. Swain said proudly. The girls eagerly introduced themselves, each making sure to appear as charming as possible. Mrs. Swain, delighted, turned to them Beckel, her eldest daughter. Accompany Sizwe to the gate, she instructed. Nisifo scowled. You always favor them Beckel over me, she muttered angrily. Minutes later, them Beckel returned, beaming. Mom, she shrieked excitedly. Sizwe took my number. We're meeting for lunch tomorrow to get to know each other better. Mrs. Swain and them Beckel screamed with excitement, then rushed upstairs to start planning. You have to look absolutely stunning tomorrow, her mother gushed. Scene 5. The next day, them Beckel woke up early, filled with excitement. She couldn't wait to meet Sizwe. Meanwhile, it was a busy day for Busey as well. She had to clean up after them Beckel's mess since she kept changing outfits, dresses, shoes, hairstyles, until her closet was completely upside down. Busey had to rearrange everything. When Sizwe arrived, he called to let them Beckel know he was outside. Before leaving, them Beckel went to Busey to brag. The man who was supposed to be yours is mine now. She sneered. What were you even thinking? Someone like you should stick to poor and broke men, because that's all you are. Busey didn't cry or respond. She was too familiar with hurtful words. Later that afternoon, around 4 p.m., them Beckel returned, carrying several shopping bags. Her mother met her at the gate, and they both waited for Sizwe's car to drive away. The moment he was gone, they screamed in excitement. Once inside, them Beckel called Busey to bring them something to drink. As they sipped, them Beckel eagerly recounted every detail of her lunch with Sizwe. She unpacked her bags one by one, proudly showing her mother everything he had bought for her. Chapter 09. Scene 1. Sizwe and them Beckel have been in a happy relationship for the past 3 months. However, Nisipho is unhappy about this, as she had feelings for Sizwe herself. To avoid Sizwe discovering that Busiswe is not in a relationship, the family came up with a plan to find Busiswe a partner. Their mother suggested finding Busiswe a boyfriend who could take her away from the house. Scene 2. Nisipho brought the guy, Esfizo, to the Zwain household. Esfizo was impressed by the house's beauty and complimented it repeatedly. Mrs. Zwain sat down with Esfiz and explained that Nisipho was engaged and soon to be married, but she had another sister who might be a good match for him. Just then, Beckel walked in, and Esfiz thinking she was the sister Mrs. Zwain was talking about, tried to hug her. Then Beckel was annoyed and pushed him away. After the awkward encounter, Faisal left, and Mrs. Zwain called for Busiswi to meet him. Busiswi came downstairs, dressed in her usual worn-out clothes. Mrs. Zwain introduced Faisal to Busiswi and suggested that he take her out for lunch. Then Beckel offered to help Busiswi get ready. Busiswi went upstairs to dress up. Then Beckel helped her, even giving her their mother's wig and a nicer dress to wear. With her new look, Busiswi felt more confident than usual. Scene 3. After getting ready, Busiswi and Sfies went out on their date. They walked to the taxi rank, but Sfies realized he didn't have enough money for transportation. Busiswi suggested they just buy something to eat at a nearby cafe instead. At the cafe, they sat down, ordered food, and started getting to know each other. Busiswi opened up about her life, sharing everything from her adoption to her current situation. She explained that she wanted their relationship to start with honesty and transparency. Sfies was touched by Busiswi's words and shared his own struggles, including his financial difficulties. Busiswi reassured him that she believed in his potential and that God would provide for them. After their date, they returned to the Zwain household. Mrs. Zwain met them at the gate and invited Busiswi inside while asking Sfizo to wait. She spoke with Sfizo, telling him that if he wanted to marry Busiswi, he could come back for her without paying the bride price up front. Mrs. Zwain surprisingly said she wouldn't want money to stand in the way of their love. Scene 4. The following week, Sfizo returned to fetch Busiswi. As agreed, they packed up her belongings and took them to Sfi's humble home. The house was a far cry from the comfortable life Busiswi was used to. It was a small, one-room dwelling where they cooked, ate, and lived together. The bathroom and toilet were outside. Busiswi was initially unimpressed, but she believed that being poor and happy was better than being rich and poor in spirit. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, cleaning and organizing the messy house, leaving Busiswi to settle in. She spent the next few days and weeks cleaning, cooking, and taking care of her new home. Some days they had food, while others they went without, relying on tips from Sfizo's job as a security guard or waiting for his meager salary at the end of the month. Despite their physical poverty, Busiswi and Sfizo were rich in spirit, and their love for each other kept them strong. Sfizo felt incredibly fortunate to have a wife like Busiswi. She had a remarkable ability to make the most of what little they had, transforming small things into something bigger and better. She was frugal and saved every little bit she could. Busiswi's presence didn't just change the physical space. She turned their humble house into a warm and loving home. Sfizo was deeply grateful for her and often thanked God for bringing her into his life. He made a promise to himself that one day he would be able to provide a better life for her. Sizwi had not yet asked for Beckel's hand in marriage or paid the bride price. He kept saying he was still getting to know her and fixing some things. Beckel believed that once Sizwi was ready, he would treat her like a princess. However, secretly, Nasipo had been developing feelings for Sizwi. She confessed her love to him, suggesting they could date without telling Beckel. Sizwi agreed, and Nasipo started dating her sisters back. Nasipo's motivation for confessing her love was seeing Beckel receive gifts and go on dates with Sizwi. Nasipo felt left out and wanted Sizwi for herself. Now, both sisters were unknowingly dating the same man, Sizwi. Scene 5. After 6 months of marriage, Busiswi discovered she was pregnant. She shared the news with her husband, Sfizo, who was shocked. He reminded her that they had agreed not to have children in their current situation. Busiswi stood firm, saying they would raise the baby together. To support her growing family, Busiswi found a job at a construction site where she worked hard, delivering cement, blocks, and mixing materials. Every morning, she would wake up early to prepare food for Sfizo before heading to work. Whenever Sfizo asked about her job, Busiswi would change the subject. One day, Sfizo followed Busiswi to the construction site and was concerned to see her doing heavy labor while pregnant. That evening, Busiswi reassured him that it was her last day at the site and that she planned to start a cooking business. She had saved enough money and was excited to begin this new venture with S5's support. S5's appreciated Busiswa's intelligence, hard work, and determination. Busiswa and S5's launched their food business, and it quickly took off. Every morning, Busiswa would prepare and cook the food, while S5's would deliver it to a busy spot where they could sell it. The business was thriving. After just 3 months, Busiswa was able to buy essential items for their unborn baby, including a crib and other necessities. She continued to work hard, and Viso remained extremely grateful for her dedication and hard work. Chapter 10, Scene 1. The Zwain household was struggling to stay afloat after Mr. Zwain's passing. His wife, who had no business experience, was vulnerable to fraud, leading to the closure of some family businesses. As a result, they were no longer able to afford their lavish lifestyle. To cope, they decided to downgrade their lifestyle. The first step was to move to a more affordable house, preferably in a rural area, where they wouldn't have to pay for utilities like water and electricity. The sisters, Thembekal and Nasipo, were strongly opposed to the idea, but their mother explained that they had no other choice. The family eventually relocated to a rural area in Richards Bay. Although the new house was beautiful, it was a significant step down from their previous lifestyle. The locals found it amusing to see Mrs. Zwain, who had once been so proud and arrogant, struggling to adjust to her new surroundings. She seemed to have forgotten her humble beginnings and was now faced with a harsh reality of her reduced circumstances. Scene 2. One evening, Busiswa wanted to confess something to her husband, Asfaiz. She revealed that she had been saving money, showing him 50,000 rand she had collected. Asfaiz was shocked and asked where she got the money. Busiswa explained that she had been saving every cent to find a better home for their future daughter. Asfaiz was overcome with emotion, crying tears of joy and gratitude. He felt unworthy of such a wonderful wife. The moment was intensely emotional, with Asfaiz praising and hugging Busiswa tightly. Then, Viso revealed that he also had something to confess. However, he wanted to wait until the next day to share his secret. Busiswa was left feeling anxious and worried, wondering what Viso's confession could be. Was he hiding something from his past? Did he have other commitments? Her mind was racing with questions, leaving her stressed and uneasy that night. Scene 3. The spoiled sisters, Thembekal and Nasipo, were struggling to adapt to their new life. They were always grumpy and had to learn to do things for themselves, which was a challenge since they had always been taken care of. Their mother was angry because she had hoped that one of her daughters would get married soon. However, that didn't seem likely. One day, Thembekal visited her boyfriend Sizwe. To her surprise, she found her sister, Nasifo, with her boyfriend. The sisters fought, and Nasifo claimed that the boyfriend wasn't really Thembekal's. It was supposed to be Busiswa's boyfriend. The fight escalated, and they were soon joined by the boyfriend, who tried to calm them down. Just as things were getting out of hand, there was a knock at the door. The boyfriend opened it, revealing his boss, who had just returned from a business trip in Dubai. It turned out that the boyfriend was just a housekeeper, and everything he had, the house, car, and money, belonged to his boss. The sisters were furious, feeling foolish for thinking he was rich. They realized they had been attracted to his wealth, not him. In anger, they left the house. Scene 4. Busiswa's husband, Asfaiz, had a big confession to make. He took her to a beautiful mansion in Umslanga, where she was shocked to discover that it was his house. Asfaiz revealed that he had been hiding his wealth from her, and that the cars and properties belonged to him. Busiswa was overwhelmed with emotions, asking Asfaiz why he had kept this secret from her. His uncle explained that Asfaizo's father had been very wealthy, but after his mother's death, his father remarried a woman who only cared about money. She spent all of Asfaizo's father's wealth, leaving him with nothing. Asfaiz had been searching for someone who would love him for who he is, not for his wealth. Busiswa was shocked, struggling to understand why Asfaiz had put her through so much struggle and hardship when he was actually rich. She had mixed emotions, feeling both happy and confused. Busiswa slept peacefully that night, like a baby. It had been a long time since she last slept so soundly, the last time being when her father was still alive. However, despite the peaceful rest, she remained stressed about visiting her mother the next day. But for the sake of her baby, she knew she had to go. She needed to get married properly since she had already been introduced to Zwain's ancestors. The following morning, the Busiswa and Asfaiz woke up and made their way to Zwain's household. Upon arrival, they discovered that Mrs. Zwain and the girls were no longer there. They had sold the house and moved. Fortunately, They managed to find the address of their new home in the rural areas. Without hesitation, they traveled there in search of Mrs. Swain. When they arrived, they found her. Spies explained everything to her, and Mrs. Swain was deeply shocked to see Busasu and Spies in fancy clothes, possessing such a luxurious car and a baby bump. Spies made it clear that he wanted to do things the right way. He wanted to pay a fair price and take Busasu's hand in marriage the proper way. To him, Busasu was worth more than billions. No amount of money could match her value. However, Mrs. Swain once told him to take Busasu for free. Meanwhile, Mrs. Swain was still in shock. Nisifo was in the house, but then Beckel was not. When come inside, she was stunned to see Busasu and Spies. A bitter thought crossed her mind. It was supposed to be me. Deep down, she felt she should have been the one in Busasu's position. She should have been the one carried that baby, the one married to a billionaire. Unfortunately, back when she had the chance, she had rejected Spies because he was too poor for her. But now, things had changed. Spies, noticing her resentment, made things clear. It's not you. It will never be you. And thank you for introducing me to my wife. I love her, and I will never cheat or hurt her. So relax. I don't want you anymore. While they were all still inside, then Beckel suddenly stormed in, shouting Nisipo's name. She walked straight up to Nisipo and slapped her. Mrs. Swain tried to calm them down and understand what was going on, but no one was willing to explain. Spies separated them. Then Beckel finally spoke up. She accused Nisipo of sleeping with her boyfriend. Mrs. Swain was at a loss for words. These children were truly unbelievable. As the argument continued, it was revealed that the boyfriend, Sizwe, was not actually rich. He was just a housekeeper who had been using his boss's assets to create the illusion of wealth. Mrs. Swain was furious. She had hoped that one of her daughters would marry Sizwe, believing him to be wealthy. Now, knowing the truth, her anger grew. Despite the commotion, Mrs. Swain promised to inform the elders about the bride price arrangements. She agreed to tell them that everything should be done at once, as the couple wanted the baby to be born in wedlock. Mrs. Swain and the girls stood in shock as Busasu and her billionaire husband drove away in their luxurious car. Nisipo, burning with jealousy, imagined herself in that position, sitting beside Spies as his wife, living the rich life. But she wasn't, and her mother wouldn't allow her to marry Spies at that time either. Scene 5. The wedding and bride BBB price ceremony finally arrived. Busasu was heavily pregnant. Due to past threats and for her safety, her husband made special arrangements. He hired a team to prepare her food, take care of her, and assign bodyguards to protect her. He didn't trust Mrs. Swain and her daughters to take proper care of her. The wedding was breathtaking, and she stood there glowing, happy, calm, and finally at peace. Later that day, after the wedding, Busasu's husband's family took her away immediately. They didn't want to risk any mistakes or dangers. 3 days at Mrs. Swain's house had been more than enough for Busasu to stay safely. After the wedding, Busasu and her husband went on their honeymoon. Instead of traveling far, they decided to keep things simple. There were too many people involved in their lives, too many voices and expectations, so they chose Cape Town as their honeymoon destination, a place that offered both privacy and comfort. The city welcomed them with quiet mornings, cool ocean air, and moments of peace they had not known for a long time. It was there that they began to settle into married life, away from the noise, learning each other in small, gentle ways. Cape Town also held a deeper significance, as it was the place where Busasu would give birth, making the journey not just a honeymoon, but the beginning of a new chapter in their lives as a family. Meanwhile, then Beckel discovered that she was pregnant, and so was Nisipo. Both were carrying Sizwe's children. However, Sizwe was nowhere to be found. He had been fired by his boss and had disappeared. 4 years later, then Beckel had 3 children, each from different fathers, which made her life increasingly difficult as she struggled to provide stability for her family. Nisipo, on the other hand, had only 1 child, but her life had taken a dark and painful turn. She had become addicted to drugs, an addiction that slowly destroyed her sense of responsibility and belonging. As a result, she no longer lived at home and chose instead to stay on the streets, far removed from her family and child. From time to time, Nisipo would return home, but her visits were not out of love or reconciliation. She would steal household valuables and sell them to support her addiction, causing deep pain and disappointment to her family. During this time, Mrs. Swain's health deteriorated significantly. She was sick and suffering from depression, overwhelmed by the challenges and heartbreak surrounding her children. Seeing her mother's condition, Busicio and her husband stepped in and offered their support, showing compassion and responsibility by helping Mrs. Swain during her time of illness and emotional suffering. Busicio went on to build a life defined by purpose, compassion, and resilience. She opened a chain of hotels and also established a children's home, both named after her adopted father, Makibo, as a way of honoring the man who had shaped her values and given her love and guidance when she needed it most. Created spaces of safety, dignity, and opportunity for others, especially children who had been neglected or abandoned. Together with her husband, Busicio made the difficult but loving decision to adopt Nasifo's baby. Nasifo was deeply trapped in drug addiction and was unable to care for her child, while Mrs. Swain had grown old and was constantly ill, making it impossible for her to continue carrying the heavy responsibility of raising the baby. Busicio and her husband, by adopting not only saved the baby from an uncertain future, but also brought hope and stability into their own home. Surrounded by love, support, and a strong sense of family, the child grew up in a nurturing environment, free from the struggles that had once threatened their life.